Hello and welcome to the Rabyd Atheist. I'm Rabyd, a former pastor turned atheist, now a compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. If you want to learn how to support the channel, its mission to normalize atheism and deconversion, stay tuned to the end of the video. Welcome to the special edition of the Deconverters Bible Study. For the month of October, I'm doing a series called Spooky Bible, where I'll be engaged in some of the weirder and more horrifying or macabre stories of the Bible, or as like today, some of the more interesting questions about certain characters in the Bible. In fact, today, the most notable one. Today I'm dealing with a question that is often brought up by legends and fantasy literature. That is, was Jesus a zombie? Was he a lich or a vampire? Jesus' resurrection in the Gospels doesn't prove Jesus is the Son of God, as those kind of stories of the resurrection are fairly common. But what does it prove based on common human understandings, based on legends and fantasy folklore? What kind of magic is being employed here? And what does this make Jesus as the central figure of the ritual? So let's get to it. Now, let's start off with the zombie. A zombie is a corpse raised to life by witchcraft. However, the corpse, after being raised, is mindless and seems to act purely at the control of the one who raised it, or in a mindless manner. I know some atheists who might argue this position as far as Jesus and his followers, but I don't think I will do that. But I don't think Jesus is represented as mindless afterwards. He talks, he engages with people, he doesn't seem to be trying to eat anybody's brains. So I'm not really sure that the zombie thing actually fits. And so let's move on to the next possibility. The next possibility I want to talk about is a vampire. Was Jesus a vampire? Now, a vampire is not mindless, but it is a form of undead creature that drinks blood in order to maintain its immortality. Now, this one gains some weight because Jesus' establishment of the blood ritual of communion. But Jesus isn't drinking anyone else's blood. His followers are drinking his blood and eating his flesh, as the bread and wine are transmuted into these things. It's a weird cross between a blood and cannibalistic ritual, but once again, Jesus himself is not consuming any of these things, so we can rule out that maybe Jesus is a vampire. But what is he trying to do to his followers then? Perhaps this is an attempt, as they consume his blood and consume his body, that they are becoming ritualistically some form of vampires or some form of cannibalistic undead, such as a ghoul. But I don't think Jesus fits the vampire motif very well, because he's not drinking anybody's blood. So we're left with a third option that I think should be considered, a lich. A lich is usually a wizard who over the course of time uses dark magic to preserve their lifespan and achieve immortality. Now, this is getting closer to home. It could be argued that Jesus is a necromancer in that sense, that he uses a blood ritual of his own sacrifice to raise the zombie horde in Matthew 27:52 through 53 that we talked about last time. So there is definitely some necromancy involved under technical definition. It could also be argued that the story has Jesus himself returning to an immortal existence afterwards. Communion and obedience to Jesus' commands then becomes a way of him sharing that immortality to others. The whole thing hinges on Jesus' sacrifice of his own body and blood, which then gives his followers power. Jesus even admits that he has scars from the ritual when he talks to Thomas. So he is not perfect in body anymore, but he's still preserving his life in an immortal state, which is kind of the side effect of the dark magic that is used to lichdom. I can see Jesus being a powerful lich king who has Yahweh as his father. Yeah, that does track to a certain point, and sometimes liches could be classified more as warlocks than wizards. Warlocks are magic users that make pacts with higher powers to have their powers and gain their strengths and immortalities. Yeah, I think if I'm going to side at the moment, I'm going to side with Jesus being some sort of lich king who has a pact with Yahweh that allows him to do a blood ritual that causes him to raise a zombie horde, but also after the blood ritual is over and he is supposedly raised from the dead, he now can transfer that immortality through people believing in him, which is another phase of an egotistical person such as a lich king, of wanting people to serve him or be afraid of him, which does track as well. And then the transformation of bread and wine being used in a blood and cannibalistic ritual, then Jesus transmutes that into his own body and blood and thus passes on that immortality. It's kind of really interesting how this really does fit the form of magic of being a lich king who also engages in necromancy and then also engages in blood and cannibalistic rituals of his followers in order to transfer that immortality to them. Now, why did I do this particular question? As a part of the Deconverters Bible Study, we have to kind of talk about why I would engage in such a question. When I was a believer, I would not have allowed this kind of irreverence to the story of Jesus. I would have said that you're being irreverent, that you're just being a jerk about it. But now, I think the reason for that is when you're conditioned and indoctrinated to give reverence to a certain character in literature, then it's really hard to break free from that. And so when people are still in the belief system and they have to deal with this, it's kind of an interesting paradigm that they have to deal with, because now they have to maintain their reverence to something. But when you take away the conditioned indoctrination reverence to the character of Jesus and start analyzing him and comparing him to other things in literature, you start to see him in many different lights. And this question simply illustrates that. We begin to conceive, can we look at Jesus as a zombie? Can we look at him as a vampire? Can we look at him as a Lich King? All based on fantasy and mythology, like any other character fiction with similar qualities. But this also proves that there's really nothing unique about the story of Jesus in the Gospels. The concepts are already existent and have been. I've made the reference before that there were plenty of resurrection stories in ancient mythology long before Jesus came along. There were plenty of stories of sons of gods and daughters of gods before Jesus came along. There's plenty of evidence for mythologies that had self-sacrifice and other things by the gods in order to appease certain forces in the world. And on the list goes. The point is that we just here have another one. And by asking the question, was Jesus a zombie, a vampire, or a lich, simply illustrates that we can see that concepts exist in humanity. As somebody who is now deconverted and an atheist, this story of who Jesus was becomes more ridiculous all the time. I'm almost actually embarrassed that one time I said that Jesus was my hero. Now I think that maybe Jesus Christ was a rabbi that a whole bunch of people took the story way too far. And the myth just kept growing and growing like any other urban legend. And the more it grew, the bigger it got. They took concepts that already exist in the world. The idea of raising the dead has been around since time immemorial. Everybody desires it. Oh, why don't we just try it? The idea of somebody being a son of God has been around longer than Jesus or even Greek mythology. So, yeah, this kind of fits. My point is this: if I can sit there and illustrate the absurdity of this story by using other examples, then maybe perhaps the story is in and of itself absurd. And as somebody who's deconverted now into a state of atheism, I look at this passage and the various passages of it and say, yeah, I can see the themes that come from other mythologies in here. And it's an inherent human thing, and that's all that it is. For those of you deconverting, I hope stuff like this helps you. You need to learn to be irreverent at times with your old faith. I think irreverence and, not necessarily, mocking the faith, don't necessarily mock people for believing it, but because you were there once upon a time yourself. The idea of learning in your mind to kind of laugh at it and realize how laughable it is at times can really help you kind of overcome some of the emotional stuff. Realizing that you can be fooled, and you were fooled, really does help. But that's just kind of my take on it. Of course, I'm sure that maybe some of you might have some alternatives to whether Jesus was a zombie, a vampire, or a lich. Perhaps you should have another alternative monster from antiquity that fits Jesus better. But I would say that based on the story, Jesus is some form of lich that has learned through necromantic rituals of some sort, because he plays with death and blood rituals and cannibalistic rituals, that if he has these sort of things, then he's engaged in some sort of black magic in order to maintain his immortality, or he is just finding ways to give that immortality to others through those rituals, creating of the zombie horde and all that other stuff. So that means that Jesus is a lich, and he is trying to make his followers into vampires and cannibals, I guess. So it's an interesting story and quite frankly, no longer interesting to me or that good of a story. But I guess indoctrination can run deep to think otherwise. So If you're out there and you have another theory about what Jesus was, maybe you don't think he was any of these three things, but maybe he fits some other story, I would love to hear that. Any other thoughts on this issue would also be greatly appreciated in the comments section, so thank you very much. I want to thank everybody for stopping by. Happy Halloween. This video did drop on Halloween of 2024, so I want to wish everybody a happy Halloween. Enjoy the holiday, have a good time, but be safe, be safe. And so thanks everybody for stopping by. I appreciate every like, share, and subscribe. They really help the channel grow. I want to give a shout out to all my members, to my citizens, my Rabyd citizens, and to my tribunes. Thank you very much. You guys are the ones that allow me to continue to do what I do. And as always, thanks for stopping by. You only get one go around and then it's over. And so you need to take all your time, money, and opportunities and spend them on yourself and people you love and care for, and to have a good time during Halloween and be irreverent and do all that stuff, and to make this a better world. You'll be happier if you do. And don't waste them on trappings of religion and faith, because that's a dead end. I speak from experience. And as always, thanks for stopping by, and I will catch you next time.